Can you tell us about some of your childhood friends? You talk about your brother a lot.
Well, my brother and I were pretty close because we only had each other. My father, as I think you're getting the picture, moved around quite a bit. My brother and I never really stayed in one neighborhood, one school, one area, one part of town, even one town, one city, terribly long. So we were always switching schools. We did not have friends that so many. I think one of the questions that I read that is a good question to think about answering is have you kept the friends that you made when you were young, when you're growing up?
Mm-hmm.
No, we were never in a place long enough. In all the years, either my parents moved every 2, 3, 4 years for one thing or another, mostly improving themselves to be factual about it.
Mm-hmm.
Or else after I was growing up, I was moving. So I never grew up and had friends that I kept from my younger days. Never did. And I don't know whether that's really, I think one of the things that's coming out of this oral history that we're really dealing with is that I live pretty much in the present. And I think a large part of that is that's all I ever had. I didn't have a heritage of living in a community, growing up in a community, growing up in a school, growing up with neighbors, growing up with school friends, like so many of us can do. So I didn't have an awful lot of friends. But saying that, I have a very strong memory of one particular time in life, and that's when we lived on West 55th Street. And that was from maybe the years, I can't remember exactly, but those must have been the years when I was in about second grade to when I was in maybe 8th grade. 7th grade, possibly somewhere along in that range, and I went to a school, public school, for most of the time, except for the first year or so. Went to a public school called Public School PS 69, Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we lived in the street, West 55th Street, between 8th and 9th Avenue, I believe it is. West 55th Street was not far away from where all the parades, whenever they had a parade, and it was only 3 or 4 blocks away that it would go up and down one of the avenues. But I remember that there were 4 of us, and I still remember two of the names.
Mm-hmm.
It was this Armenian kid,
Mm-hmm.
who they always called Greek. They said, "Hey, Greek." And then there was an Italian kid whose name I cannot remember anymore, but it's discourteous in this day and age, but we called him Wop. It's not a good name to call an Italian player, but he was our friend.
Mm-hmm.
And a Chinese guy by the name of Louis Wong. And a black kid, black as you ever saw, fun, by the name of Harry Halsey. And the 4 of us lived on West 55th Street, or one of the neighboring blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And we played games in the street. We would have, those were the friends I had at those early years that I had.
Mm-hmm.
But when we moved to Elmhurst, out in the island, they were gone.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether it was just that you didn't in those days keep touch with kids that you grew up with for a period of time and keep contact, but it was not a time when we did, and so I never did after that. So my brother and I, meanwhile, were the only 2 that were always together. He was a year and 4 months younger than I am,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just the 2 of us. And I always grew up feeling like I had to make sure that he was okay.
Mhm.
and he was a bit of the fair hair boy in the family of the two of us,
Mhm.
and I was the one who was always in trouble, but I was always looking out for him.
Mhm.
I remember that very, very clearly for those years. And we were close until the year, which was my senior year, that we went to Mount Hermon School after World War II.
Mhm.
And we were sent to Mount Hermon, and my father and mother went to Kent, Ohio.
Mhm.
When we went to Mount Hermon School, he was a junior, I was a senior, which has its own problems going to that kind of a school.
Absolutely.
On your senior year when you really don't have that kind of a level of education.
Yeah.
I think somebody must have owed my uncle a favor or something, and so they let me in, and they let me out. I really have always felt that way. After that, to really close that question, after that, my brother stayed there for another year. I went to Kent. My brother, I don't even remember what happened after he got out of Mount Hermon School.
Mhm.
But the two of us were on two separate tracks from then on. We have hardly been close. In recent years, maybe the last 10 years or so, we've really made an honest effort to really become close again.
Mhm.
But this is an awfully late time in life to try to do that.
In your senior year, how was that? Did you have any sense of that change that was going to be happening? Like, did you realize that this is my last chance to spend time with my brother?
I think both of us, each of us, we've never verbalized it exactly, except that we have spoken to the fact that, we've missed an awful lot of life together. We've lived in two separate parts of the country, virtually all of our adult lives, growing up and after that time, and college years, life onward. We've lived totally separately, so we're two different people, totally different people. Culturally, attitude-wise, our sense of community, our sense of place. Interestingly enough, professionally, he does the same thing I do.
Mm-hmm.
We're both musicians.
Mm-hmm.
We're both vocal musicians. He teaches voice and conducts choirs until he retired. He taught one place for 30, I forget how many years,
Mm-hmm.
in one of the state universities of New York in Oswego. And I ended up doing the same thing, basically.
Yeah.
So we had a lot in common, professionally, and in terms of skill sets and so forth. But we have never really lived close at all, or been close at all. He went through a hell of a horrible marriage, and divorced, and she died, and his children are still problem children. He has two sons as a result of that, and he's doing well. He's successful. He has a good retirement, and he's doing wonderful things. I admire him hugely for one of the things that he's doing, which is part of the relationship now. One of his sons has 3 children, and his own son, the father of those 3 children, has had a very difficult life with substance abuse, and can't work, hasn't been able to work or hold things very well, and same with his mother, the children's mother.
Mm-hmm.
So he and his second wife have really taken on the 3 grandchildren and have become their parents, and have been educating them and sustaining them and getting them going on their lives. And I think I can't tell you how much I admire him for that. But I have not been a partner in his life in all of that. That's part of what I've learned in recent years about him.
Do you ever wish that he had been in your life more? Like, is there ever time
Oh,
when you
sure,
think that?
I do. But it is an intellectual thing. It is not one of those things that, gosh, bro, I've missed you. Because we each were too early in our lives involved with our own lives in two separate places in the world. And so we just never stayed connected. And I guess there's a weakness someplace in that mix, and I don't know exactly where it comes from. I have some thoughts and some theories, but for another time.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of the cultural differences between you and your brother, and then you mentioned the your little group of four friends you grew up with, including yourself, and that kind of ties in nice with this question. I ask you, tried to run away from your heritage, not be like Grandpa, but ended up bending that way. Tell us about any tension between the two of you growing up.
Between my father and me?
Well, I guess
or between my brother and me?
Well, I think the question is between your father and you, but I guess in particular with as it pertains to cultural identity. If you were trying to distance yourself from your heritage at one point in time, how did that affect?
I don't think that distancing had anything to do with the distance, with the separation from my brother.
Mm-hmm.
It had a lot to do with the separation at the early part of my adult life from my father.
How so? Like, how did your father's heritage manifest itself, and how did your moving away from that end up manifesting itself?
How many hours do you have?
All the time you need.
Well, seriously, that's a tough question. My father was a very severe man. He could be, and in actuality, he was of nature a very gentle person, extremely gentle person, an extremely sensitive person. Too much so, perhaps, for his own good in terms of human relations terms. He was taken advantage of many times. But in terms of being a parent, he was a tyrant, and so I grew up admiring him, inheriting a lot of gift from him. We haven't even begun to touch on that. That's another time. But my musical gift showed up early, and he recognized it. I didn't recognize it. I recognize it now. But the father-son relationship was such that even though I was pretty much easygoing most of the time, I also just hated the way I was treated, and I was put down all the time. The byword in our house that I always heard in my ears growing up from my father was, "You can never do anything right." That was strictly a function of the fact that the love-hate relationship on his side was partially related to, and we're going to get into some pretty deep stuff pretty quick, but I only learned in recent years, the last dozen years, that my parents were not married when I was conceived. It explains everything in terms of the growing up relationship, and it's related to this. Mm-hmm. But it's a hard one to really verbalize, except that I did not want to be in the same profession as my father, even though I recognized I was musically very skilled. Early, very early. I could read music before I was in school. I could read books before I was in school. I was playing the violin and learning the piano when I was 5, 6, 7, whatever it was. I was reading musical scores, orchestral scores, when I was 6 and 7 in New York City in the West 55th Street, listening to records. My father was an inveterate record buyer. We didn't have money for much, but we had money for that, and it proved to be one of the most valuable investments in terms of my life, because I learned also how to listen from my father. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of love-hate relationship, because I hated the way I was treated. but I loved and recognized what I got, but I didn't want to pursue what he did. And so I rejected trying to be a musician for a long time, and tried to make success in my own life in all sorts of other ways and other directions that I had some skills in that I developed that were not really what I was about, but I could do. I could earn a living, I could support a family, and for at some moments, not badly. But it got to the point where I finally, in my early 40s, realized at some point in time I'm going to have to become a musician for the rest of my life. Otherwise, I'm going to die. I'm inside of me. I'm going to die. Yeah. Item number one. Item number two. I don't know what made me think this. A guy upstairs, maybe. I don't know. But I knew I had to forgive my father for who he was in terms of what he did to me. And I did. I never told him. I think all my children, your parents, I think they know this part of the story. But there was a time when I literally, inside of myself, forgave him and cleaned my slate. Truly did. And it was only after that I was able to make the change in my life that ended up making me a successful choral director and musician for the rest of my life, which I'm still having fun doing at some considerable age.